success is a cake that you can't bake without the ingredient of failure. You just cannot get to success, and certainly not sustained success, without a good dose of failure. And
Hey guys, welcome to another exciting episode of Fail with Fire. I'm your podcast host, Phoenix Ha, CEO and co-founder of AdBeacon, my favorite first-party data optimization and first-party attribution platform. That being said, forget D2C and think about real hearts of people, which is why I have invited Mike Beckham to the podcast, and I'm so excited to have him on here. Mike, say hi to everybody.
hey, everybody, good to be here.
That being said, I always like to start off a little bit with how we met, and it's a very brief meeting. It's more of a Twitter and a tweet meeting too. But so, Mike, you were at the Commerce Roundtable in San Diego, not this last year, but the year prior.
Yeah, 23.
23, correct. And you're on the Operators podcast. We did like a live Operators podcast, and I started listening about your story and how you spoke about business. You're very faith-led as well, but the way that you spoke about business, and Sean Frank really spoke to me. Jason Panzer's awesome too. Just your co-host, amazing, but just the different perspectives. And I think I resonated with who you are. And there's a quote of another video I grabbed, and it was so synergistic. It's failure is not an unfortunate but necessary byproduct of success. Failure is the fuel that leads to success. It is impossible to get to success without failure.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I'm thrilled to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here. And I love talking about this. I think you've already said it, but we live in a world of chest beating, and Twitter, the algorithm, that kind of defines our life in so many areas, certainly responds to saying flashy numbers, or here's the 10-step process to how I got to big success. And generally that stuff is uninteresting to me. I really am much more interested, I think, in the people side and the internal thought processes that help people to thrive and to be successful just in life. And some of this is that before I worked in the business world, I worked in the nonprofit world. I was in full-time ministry for 10 years. And so really all I did for 10 years was talk to people about what made them tick internally. And it's interesting, as I've gotten into the business world, I've become more and more convinced that what most people want is they want tactical kind of, here's what you do, here's how you optimize, here's the silver bullet strategy. But I'm more and more convinced that really successful people in the business world, it's actually much more about what's going on internally with them, and the way that they become a magnet for other talented people and for opportunity as a result of how they see the world internally. So I love talking about it. And, you said it, one of the ways that I'll say it is success is a cake that you can't bake without the ingredient of failure. It's just like bread without yeast won't rise. You just cannot get to success, and certainly not sustained success, without a good dose of failure. And so, yeah, I would be happy to dive into that more if you want to.
Yeah, excited to do so. And, failure, we say here, is the catalyst to change and great things, right? It's the fire. If you fail without purpose, right? So you fail at something, but you don't take anything away from it, or you don't reflect on it to be able to have the fire that fuels you for whatever it may be, whatever change, personal, financial, who cares? Then it is just that, it's a failure. But if you realize that there is that silver lining, it is that silver bullet to something bigger, then it has purpose. And I think purpose is what drives us. And you're absolutely right in terms of like the magnetization of certain types of people that really want to get to know people. And I always call it like the LTV effect, right? So if you come in and you're like, I want tactical. Okay, great. You want the immediate sale. You want the BFCM vibe. If you want LTV, the lifetime value, really understand how they tick, really understand what their goals are, who they are, see if you align, and then build something great. And also, if you can't offer something to them right now that is beneficial to them, or if you can't help them, don't expect to take, is also another thing for me. So And then down the road, if you do have something, you always keep them in mind because you like them as a person and you've invested in who they are and what, their pillars are. But that being said, you're very modest in the sense of where the way that you speak, but I do need to shed some color to those who aren't familiar with you. I did pull your bio very quickly, and this is the most I would say details you will ever get. But you are the co-founder and chief executive officer of Simple Modern, and currently generating a 9-figure annual revenue, and that's pretty incredible. I won't speak too much to the numbers because I think it speaks to itself. If you guys want to look up who Mike Beckham is, you can do that on your own time. But I think what I would say I want to highlight is you're a teacher, you're a leader, and you're an entrepreneur at heart. And before founding Simple Modern, rather, you began your career worldwide Christian ministry at CRU. And I think that is something to look into as well. So that being said, of being a teacher, a leader, and an entrepreneur, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Fail with Fire. I am excited to dive into whatever failure you want to share with us. And there is one tradition we have here before I do that. So I like to say this because often our family members have no idea what we do for They kind of have a gist, but they don't really know. So if I was at a barbecue and I met your wife and, I've never met you before and she pulls you and she's like, I need you to meet Mike. How would she introduce you to me? What would you say?
Well, what she would do is she would say, he's the CEO of Simple Modern, and we sell like water bottles and tumblers. A lot of times I've really struggled with, especially in my market, our company has become very, very well known. And I really want to be non-pretentious. And so a lot of times I might just say, I work at a water bottle company, or I work at Simple Modern. And so there've been actually some funny instances where I told somebody that, and then they find out, down the line that I was, my role at the company, and they're like, I can't believe you didn't tell me that. But so mine is kind of easy. Like we just, generally we make things that people drink out of. We do some other stuff like bags and stuff, but generally we make water bottles and tumblers. And it's nice because that's super concrete for people. And the other thing is I can say, well, we sell on our website, but we sell on Amazon, Walmart, Target, everywhere, and that gives people, because it's kind of a concrete physical world thing, people are like, okay, I can kind of file that. So, and early on, nobody had heard of us. And now when I tell people, usually they have some kind of intersection with the brand of, whether it's, oh man, my cabinets are full of your stuff. We already have way too much, or my wife loves your brand, or whatever, which is fun, that when you build something and it actually means something to other people, going from anonymity to those words meaning something is a pretty special, I think, accomplishment, and I appreciate it. But I still try to be in public non-pretentious, to the point that sometimes my wife is like, why are you so weird? Just tell them what just tell them what you do and who you are, So anyway, that's probably how I'd answer it. I work at a water bottle company.
It's also more fun to watch how people treat you without knowing too,
Yeah.
It's my mom's now ex-boyfriend was a very powerful person in the medical space. So he was one of the founding forefathers of minimal invasive spinal surgery. And in that, it comes with a lot of weight, right? We walk into a room and they know exactly who he is. And I got to see things change. And eventually he started changing who he was in terms of how he introduced himself. And then it would change how people interact. Now, this is not always the case, but I find it to be interesting. So I work in a different, or I would say, category of business. Like yours is very easy to understand. Water bottles,
right?
Modern, and they have memories attached to them.
Yeah, data tracking is, and cookies, it's like they're like, what is that?
The driest thing on the planet, right? And my husband is a winemaker, right?
Oh yeah. So everybody's like, okay, I'm just like, if you both introduce yourself, they're like, okay, whatever. So tell me about the wine,
Yeah, exactly. And I always, I come to the conclusion that I just tell people that I'm a janitor, and they're like, why? And I'm like, I just clean things up is really what I do. And like,
there you go. I'm a digital janitor. That's all you need to say.
He makes wine. But no, I love that question because sometimes your spouse will introduce you as one thing, right? They'll be like, oh, they'll gas you up. But they're like, oh my gosh, he's this, that. And, it seems like you're really proud of you, and as she should be. And then sometimes people are like, I don't know what this person does, but they click buttons on the internet and we make money, so we're fine. So
Right.
It's a fun question.
Right. It's like if you're in crypto or whatever, how do you describe that? I do think that it's absolutely a thing. And you mentioned something earlier. It is interesting because we spend a lot of our life trying to figure out how do I introduce myself in a way that sounds impressive. And then you can get to a point, and whatever that point is, I found it where you stop trying to sound impressive and you're actually trying to say, if anything, I probably want to downplay play things, which is interesting. And you mentioned why Bill Murray once said, if somebody wants to be rich and famous, I would encourage them to just be rich first and see if that doesn't scratch 99% of the itch. Because you do get treated differently when people perceive you to have a certain type of status. And generally, I don't like it. I mean, generally, I really wish I could go back to the earlier days of the company in that respect. There are certainly some things that are fun about it, but like it's not fun when you know somebody's treating you differently because of their perception of what you do or that you might be able to help them or whatever else. And so that's another thing that drives why I try to live a pretty normal lifestyle, like whether it's the car I drive or whatever else. I'm not trying to put a big neon sign on. I guess, although I do the operators podcast. So if you're, maybe that's a terrible way to, there goes my anonymity. But
Well, here's my chess piece to that. So I was a model for many years, and what was really numbing, it's a mind-numbing thing. It's a two-pronged situation. So one, I take rejection very well. I take it as like you just move on. And I'm a founder, and I'm a operator as well. So for me, I get a lot of rejection. I get a lot of yes, no, right? It's fine. I kind of water off my back kind of thing because of modeling. But on top of that, what comes with it is this idea of what a model is versus the actual job in itself. And I don't think many people realize that they treat you in a weird way. And for what? I get pictures taken. Awesome. I'm an advertiser is really what's happening. I'm advertising a product. And what happened, funny story, is that I had a friend who was an influencer. And because I had stepped down from modeling and decided to try to figure out what the next chapter of my life was, I was not being invited to as many things. And I wasn't being, treated the same way. I wasn't in the inner circle. So you got a taste of both sides, right? You get the high, fun, same portion that you were saying. And then you got the other side where it's like, oh, I'm on the outside. So now because I've experienced both and tasted both, I very much appreciate these conversations and ones that get down to the point. I could care less about where you've been, where you are, and where you're going in terms of travel, because that's what really, really, I would say flamingos, like the peacocks do. They talk about all those things. I want to talk to the person who is in the back corner, who doesn't want to talk to anybody and might have the most insight because they're the watchers. And it seems like that's kind of the way that you've gone about things, and I very much align. But that being said, I want to talk about failures. That's why you're here.
okay.
And
So I've got a couple of failure takes for you.
let's do it. I'm ready for it. Whatever.
All right. Here's the first one. I think in general, I think that the most successful people don't view things in terms of success and failure. And that's the counterintuitive thing as a start, which isn't to say, like, I think the idea of failure, like, we're going to use that as more of like a general, like, blanket term. But what it implies is that I was trying to do this thing with X desired outcome and I didn't get that outcome. And so it's failure. I wanted to get hired for this job. I applied for the job. I went to the interview. They did not hire me. Failure. So failure is a real thing. Like when our expectations or hopes, we don't reach them, that's a real thing. But one of the things that I think the most successful people do is that they're able to reframe those things in a way that makes them pretty different than how most people talk about failure. Most people talk about failure as that's so disappointing, that's so detrimental that just happened, that I hoped A would happen, but D happened instead. And that really has a negative impact on my life. What I think really resilient and successful people do is they instead say, I had hoped for A to happen, but D happened. But I was able to take that experience and learn, grow, evolve from it in a way where my life's better. And so like, here's like the the first idea I would throw out, which is we control our expectations. We don't really control outcomes. We do control how we respond to outcomes. So in any, we're going to always have expectations for our business and what we want to earn this quarter, what we want our relationship to look like, whatever. How much money we hope to save by the time we're 40, whatever that thing is. And sometimes you're going to exceed that expectation, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're going to miss that expectation. But the core question is, when you miss an expectation, maybe even when you exceed it, how do you respond to that? How do you interpret that? How do you process it? And my perspective is that the most helpful things in my life that have ever happened have been quote unquote failures. So the most successful things that have ever happened in my life were actually failures, because they proved as catalysts that helped me to recalibrate the way that I saw the world or the way that I approached things in a way where my life was dramatically better in the future. And so that's the thing about the way that we talk about failure, which is counterintuitive. I mean, sometimes it's like, hey, I guess I had this expectation. I didn't reach it. I learned nothing from it. And I kept making the same mistake until I died. Okay, well, that's failure. Maybe. But if instead we're just saying, hey, sometimes things don't work out the way you want them to, I don't think that's necessarily failure. It's failure if you don't allow it to change the way that you view yourself, change the way you view the world. So to me, that's an internal mindset. One of the things that, one of the ways we'll say this is that we view mistakes as tuition. Mm. So if you think about it, when you go to college, you pay a bunch of money and you pay it to just learn, to just have a different perspective inside your head. They don't give you anything. All they give you is information and hopefully a different perspective. And you're willing to pay a lot of money for it. And so if you think about that like, just because something was hard, just because something was costly, just because something took a lot of time or, was humiliating or whatever, if you take that cost and you got something out of it, then it can be a great exchange. It can be a really successful exchange. The key is looking at it that way and taking it that way. And so I think that's one of the things that's been the most helpful for me. It's interesting because there's two different ways that you could kind of frame my career. And like you said, let's not get into all the specifics, but there's one way you could tell my story where it's like, basically everything he's ever done has pretty much turned to gold and it's been awesome. And then there's another way you can frame my career, which is I have been tantalizingly close to a blowout success 30 times, and 20 something of them I just missed. And that, I actually think the second one is probably a more accurate kind of picture of, and in fact, I would say that a couple of those times where I've been really, really close to the right idea at the right time, or, whatever, and it didn't work out, have turned out to be fuel for some of the most successful things that have happened, or, quote unquote, successful things that have happened in my life. So this goes back to in business and life, the hardest person to manage is yourself, and the way that you think and the way that you talk to yourself. There's a lot of people, like one of the things I'll ask people sometimes is, think about, you manage people, think about how you talk to them. Think about how you talk to them when they've made a mistake. Now, let me ask a question. How do you talk to yourself when you've got an unmet expectation, when you come up short? What is the way you talk to yourself internally? Could you talk to somebody you manage that way, or would they just quit immediately? And then the question is, well, if you talk to somebody else the way that you talk to yourself and it would never fly, what makes you think it's any different with yourself? How is managing yourself any different than managing somebody else? And yet I think we often do manage ourselves really radically different than we would manage other people. So all that to say, I think it actually starts with, I'm going to make everything count. I'm going to make everything count. Whether I hit my expectations, I exceed them, I miss them, I am going to reflect. I am going to learn from it. I'm going to get value out of that. And it's going to help me to be more effective going forward.
Is there a specific moment in time where this has applicability? like this mindset for you? Because you said you have 30
Yeah.
is 20 you probably missed, 10 that hit. Everyone sees the 10 that hit, doesn't see the 30 you tried and the 20 you failed, right? But the 20 that you failed, I'm really intrigued to press into. So if
Yeah.
you run out of the 20 that you really sits in your mind and you go, wow, that kind of really shifted some things for me.
Sure. Well, I'll give two examples. One that's more specific and one that's more general. One of the biggest decisions I ever made was I had a seismic shift in how I responded to feedback in my early 20s. I did debate in high school. I was very good at debate. And so if you came to me and said, Mike, hey, I've noticed this thing about you and I think it's not great, whatever it is, any kind of constructive critical feedback, you had better be ready because I am going to be able to come back. One of my best friend works with me and he's like, man, sometimes I can get in a debate with you and I lose even though I'm right. But I lose decisively because you're just so good at arguing. And so this is how I was if anybody brought critical feedback for me. Hey, the way that you talk to me, the way that you handle this thing, whatever. And then I had this turning point in my early 20s where I realized if instead of responding with defensiveness and anger or shame or whatever, if instead I said, this is an opportunity to learn, this is an opportunity to grow. And most people don't respond this way because it's like, if somebody's coming to me with constructive feedback, they're telling me I'm a failure. I don't want to feel like a failure, so I'm repelling it. But if instead I'm just like, I'm going to put my arms around this thing and I'm going to now go from assuming if you bring me critical feedback that you're wrong to I'm going to presume you are right. I'm going to presume that there's at least some truth to what you're saying and that if I embrace it, I can grow from it and I can be a more effective person. And so I aspired to I want to be the most coachable, most open feedback person that I know.
Instead of
Eh,
being an articulate bulldog, which you were.
That's right. And so guess what happens? That single decision, which, basically saying, hey, I'm open to you telling me when you feel like I failed. And I want to hear it. It's interesting because you know what that does? People will share more with you. You'll realize that you're failing more than you thought you were failing. But you know what else grows with that is your self-awareness and your skills. And so compound that over 5, 10, 20 years. And all of a sudden it's like, well, you've got something pretty powerful. I am a much more self-aware person. I'm a much more effective person. I'm a much more intelligent person because I became secure enough in myself that I was okay with people pointing out my failures and saying, hey, you're probably right. Hey, tell me more about that. I want to learn. I want to grow. And so anyway, that's a more general one, but I think it's incredibly applicable because everybody has this. Everyone receives critical feedback, whether it's your spouse or your coworkers or your children or whoever. And we get it regularly, I don't know, daily, weekly, and we have a choice of how we're going to respond to that. And most people are so insecure that the idea of really hearing it and really responding to it is too painful because it feels like failure. So that's one. More specifically, as you mentioned, I was in the full-time ministry world. I helped my brother start a business. It got very big, very quick. It took it 13 months to go from its first day of sales to its first $1 million revenue day. So this thing scaled at just crazy hyper lightning speed. And I was basically working 2 full-time jobs. I needed to make a decision about what I was going to do. And the thing that was really compelling about moving into the full-time business world was my brother and I had another idea. Like the first idea that it hit, it was kind of like, it's an okay idea, but we think we have an even better idea. And so it was decided, I decided I was going to leave the nonprofit world and I was going to work in the business world to build this idea. We spent about 2 years on it, millions of dollars, and just bottom line, it just didn't. It just failed. And I would like to say that when it was first obvious that it was going to fail, that I was ready to throw in the towel, but I absolutely wasn't. And so it was kind of like, the patient's already dead, but you're there with the paddles trying to resurrect it for several hours, kind of deal. So we spent, I don't know, maybe up to a year and a half, even after launch, trying to find a way to make the numbers work. And part of it was just, I was just not about to accept that I had failed in this thing.
Mhm.
And that experience taught me something really interesting about persistence that I'd never learned before, which was I'd always thought about persistence as like a universal virtue, basically in business. We hear about how important grit is, and we read stories of persistence by semi-famous founders, and so we just think if I bulldog this thing, if I just don't quit, then eventually I win. And what that process taught me was actually that sometimes persistence is a very toxic trait. I mean, that can be that we're in a toxic relationship. That there's relationships where it's like, no, you don't need to be persistent. You need to bail. That can be a business that we're in. That can be a habit that we have. And so, what I learned through that process, interestingly, was I learned how to quit. And so ironically, that's been one of the best parts about failure is failure has taught me more about quitting, and that what very effective, very successful people do is they actually are really good at quitting, really strategic and really smart about quitting. There's a fantastic book on this. It's called The Dip by Seth Godin, but it's all about quitting well. And that was this was like a mind-blowing idea the first time I heard it, that like one of the skills I have to have in my arsenal is quitting, or I'm not going to be able to be effective. So those are a couple things that I think really like learning to temper my persistence, my natural doggedness with strategic quitting, and then really viewing feedback as a gift and embracing it and trying to be really coachable. And the combination of those two things, I think, were a big part of the foundation, kind of emotionally, mentally for me, that for when I started Simple Modern.
Those are really, really great examples. I appreciate that and thank you because I thought a couple things about the first one, right? The more general example, and I said you were an articulate bulldog. The reason why I said that is because I am the same way. Just because
Sure.
you have the gift to be, so it's like fight or flight. Let me use that as an example. You don't know if you're fight or you're flight until you're put in that position. It's the same thing with failure. If you're not put into a position where you have to decide something at a moment where everything's up in flames, you don't know what kind of leader you are, whatever it may be. And sometimes when people attack you or you think you're being attacked with criticism or I would say feedback, it's fire. And you don't know what type of person you are until you're in it. Some people will start to be very defensive. Some people are more articulate and some people are not. You are articulate because you have the arsenal of being with a background of debate and you're very good at it. No one could ever win. And you're more
Yeah.
concerned with winning than you were with listening. And if
Right.
anything, that made you weaker, not stronger. So it was really cool that you were able to acknowledge that. And for those who are listening, I'm still going through this. I'm newly married. I got married in February.
Yeah.
And my husband is the coolest person ever, but also does not argue the way I do. And, it's one of those things of receiving feedback is the most powerful thing can do for a long-term reward, right? Because the Mike Beckham, however many years ago that got that feedback and decided to make that shift, is now a much better leader, probably father, probably husband than you ever were. And at the time, you're just probably like, I'm winning. Well, you're not really winning. So I thought that was
Yeah.
a really beautiful thing. And I appreciate you
Let me
sharing.
let me interject one just interesting
Go for
counterintuitive
it.
thing right there. If you're a parent, what is it that your kids most need to see from you? And what we tend to say is, well, they need to see me demonstrating the kind of behavior that I want to see from them. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's true. But what I think they need just as much or even more is they need to see us deal with disappointment and failure and how we respond to it. What the research is super clear that becoming a effective, resilient adult requires dealing with failure. Our culture is in a little bit of it's in a state of confusion, I would say right now, where we think that helping our kids to be successful is just helping them avoid like hard things. And the research is really clear. Like that has the opposite effect. It makes them really brittle and fragile. That we want our kids to be exposed to hard things, but how do we expect our kids to know how to deal with hard things if we don't model it to them? And that what's the most powerful is when our kids can watch us deal with hard things, watch us deal with disappointment, discouragement, and see how we react to it. And what's even better is if you can explain to them as you're going through it, what's going through your head and decode it for them. Don't make them try and guess, but actually decode it for them. So it's good if my kids see me experience disappointment in an area of my life and see how I respond to it, and me to talk through with them, hey, this was really disappointing, but even though it was disappointing, I feel like I could learn these things from it. And so this is how I'm going to act differently. Here's how I'm going to think differently as a result. Man, that stuff is essential, I think, for raising children that are going to be able to do well in life.
On the other side of the coin for that, Mike, which is really interesting. So my mom's an entrepreneur. She's an incredible entrepreneur. She's an immigrant. She became a millionaire before 30, came here at 16, didn't speak the language, all that stuff. Incredible woman. And I distinctly remember sitting down because what she would do, she would work. And I'd play with this vent that was like an air conditioning vent all day long. And I'd hear her be on calls. And I was very observant of how she did business. And I will never forget this. Papa John's was suing her. She had a building. Papa John's rented it. She wanted them gone. It was this whole thing. It became a huge lawsuit. And she was just inches away from bankruptcy.
Really?
I remember she was going through that. And I was nervous. Didn't know what to be nervous for. I had no concept of money, no concept.
Sure. But you knew there was tension.
100%. And I think at this day and age, most parents, and I'm not a parent, so take it with a grain of salt, people, but they always want to shield their children from seeing them struggle and shield them from any uncomfortable thing. My mom let me sit in that with her. I'm in it with her because at the end of the day, food on the table is if she has food, like money in her account. And she kind of walked me through it and she made it work. And she came back stronger than ever. She'll never forget about Papa John's. We'll never eat there. That was a loyalty component. But, I'm just trying to show as a testament on the other side, it made me realize, that at the very end, it can all change. You have to be able to kind of sit through it and be calm and very decisive of what the next move is going to be. But if she would have shielded me from that, I don't know. I know that shaped me is what I'm trying to say.
How old were you?
I would say maybe like 7 or 8.
So, I mean, this is a formative memory. Like, I think what you just said is huge. That this is, you think about it, how many memories do you remember from 7 or 8? Not very many.
Not very many.
And so it's one of the very few things you remember. And so let me draw a parallel here. Because I agree. In our families, it can be easy to be like, well, the way I provide, the way I help take care of them is I shield them from hard things. And the real downside to that is then if things go really bad to the point where you can't shield them anymore and they're just blindsided by it, like what, we're bankrupt, but let me do a parallel here. How do you treat your employees and team members? Because often we do the exact same thing. We shield them from the truth. And number one, they cannot help if they don't know. But also the same exact thing is true. How are they going to learn how to deal with a big down quarter? How are they going to learn to deal with a really contentious relationship, or with a vendor or whatever, if we don't show them and teach them how to do that? So as an example of this, so this is 21. We had a real habit of going to China a lot. Our primary manufacturing has been in China, and we had a habit of going, 5, 6, 7 times a year. We spent a lot of time over there. And every time we went, we'd spend time in the factory, QA, a bunch of stuff. In 2020, obviously, those trips stopped. And in 2021, I was putting my daughter to bed, and I had just gotten her a new bottle. And she asked if I'd fill it up. I filled it up. I gave it to her, and she's like, I can't drink out of this. And I tried to drink out of it, and I was like, I can't either. And so after she went to bed, I started looking at it, and I realized the valve was a little bit different. Now, this will happen occasionally. A wrong valve will get put in something. So I was like, maybe it's not a big deal. The next day I get to the office, I try a few, and it's like of new bottles that have come in, and I'm like, well, these aren't these aren't working right either. And it set off a couple-day kind of fact-gathering mission where we realized our manufacturer had changed a valve in our water bottles, and it was defective. And as a result, you could not drink from our water bottles. And as we pulled on the string, we found that they had shipped about 1 million defective units. So, I mean, I remember this really clearly. In fact, I remember it so clearly because there was conflict around how I handled it. Our chief manufacturing officer, is obviously super concerned. He's like, I will handle it. I will fix it. And I'm like, that's great, but that's not how we're going to approach this. And the moment I realized we had a really big issue, I pulled like 20 something people into a room. I pulled, gosh, maybe at that point might have been 3/4 of the company. And so there's a bunch of non-senior people in there. And I'm like, we're going to talk through this issue and we're going to talk through what we're doing. Most of them sat in that meeting and said nothing. So why did I do it? The entire reason I did it was exactly because of what we're saying. Like, we had a real disaster on our hands. And I wanted to bring in a lot of people in the company into seeing kind of up close, here is how we're going to process through it. Here's how we're going to manage it. And it was interesting because it led to a lot of conflict between my chief manufacturing officer and I, because he was like, that's really embarrassing that basically you brought everybody into it. And my perspective was developing people and helping them to be able to deal with issues is more important than our egos. And so anyway, that's an example of that we tried to be really open with the entire company about, hey, we've got a massive problem and then we're going to have to fix it. And it ended up when we reworked 1 million water bottles, which is just an insane number of bottles to pull every valve out and rework. Everybody in the company was a part of it. So even in the fixing it, it was like everybody played a role. But it just goes back to this point that we're making, which is you're trying to teach people to be resilient so that when things don't go the way they hope they'd go, that they don't fall apart, And there's only one way to do that, and that's by exposing them to things that are not going very well and showing them what it looks like to not lose your mind and to continue to be constructive and to work through things and talking them through what you're thinking as you're doing it, and modeling it to them. So whether this is true, whether it's your kids or your company or anything else.
Buy-in as well.
Sure.
Your kids are you can only tell your kids so many times they can't do something. You're going to do it, and then they're going to learn why it was wrong, and then they'll come back to dad and be like, okay, we're right. Or you could sit them down and have them solve it with you. You spark kind of a funny memory. I used to work at Case was a very seldom admitted fault. And what would happen is you would have this echo and this trickle down the line as you started to get down. I hate the word down, but let's just say executive to managerial to, and you would hear people go, oh yeah, well, our shoes are crap anyway. It's not true. But if you would have said, hey, like, let's just counter this. Let's just say there was something defective in the shoes and we were brought in, 20 people were brought in and said, this is what's happening. This is how we're going to fix it. Then everybody in the company is like, wow, we really care about the commitment of our shoes. Or the quality of our shoes, rather. We're here to stand behind it and we're here to solve it. And now they're bought in to help be the resolution behind it. There's so much more buy-in. And then there's also, you're saying, that training people to be stronger. You're building a husk. And then the counter to that too is, I remember I moved over from a director role and I moved on to the CEO of AdBeacon. I had to choose somebody to take that director role. And she was going through some really hard times with dealing with clients. And some people like to throw people into the walls and say, good luck, bye. I also find that to be a detriment as well. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I think it's so important to also, in your CEO, where you have to be the leader that's the calm one. I was talking to Sean Frank about this. I said, what kind of leader are you when everything hits the fan? Are you frantic or are you calm? He's like, I'm frantic, but when it really matters, I'll be calm. And I'm a very calm person in a storm because I've been through many storms. If I didn't have the storm, then I wouldn't probably be calm. To your point, you have to go through it. So, Mike, I have to ask you this one last thing. What kind of leader are you in a storm? Are you calm? Are you frantic? Are you a combination of both? And why?
So I think that I'm generally like really calm. One of my, I don't know if it's a superpower, but just like something I've noticed about myself is that in emergency situations, I get super, super calm. Like I've been in some situations where it's like, oh, okay, somebody just pulled a gun. Okay, like that might be that guy might be having a heart attack, and I'm able like I don't get freaked out. But one thing I will say that's interesting is eh, I think there's a temperament thing here that's not like under your control how you respond. And I think your team needs to see both. I think they need to see emotion that's in line with the urgency of a situation. So if there's a situation that's, like this water bottle thing, and I'm just like, it's gonna be fine. It's no big deal. Like to some extent, they need me to be like, hey, this is a freaking 4 alarm fire. Like we have got to do something.
Yeah.
Even if I feel calm, like they need to hear that. They need to hear the urgency. So I think it's about knowing yourself and your temperament. If you are the type of person to overreact, you're going to hit the emotion part fine.
Right.
It's about calming yourself and intentionally making sure that you're not saying particularly bombastic things. We're screwed. This is the end of the company, whatever, like types of things that people will do. Or, one of the worst things people do that when they're functioning out of emotion in difficult situations is they just start going after other people.
Yeah.
Why'd you do this? You should have known better, whatever. And you can do a lot of damage. You can burn a lot of stuff down in a very short period of time. So, and if you're the other side, if you're more stoic, it's like your team does need to hear from you that this is a real issue. Like I think hearing urgency and emotion, but it is going to be okay, and ultimately we are going to fix this, is what people really need to hear. So, I think during COVID there was very much a period like that for us, where it was like, hey, we are going to be okay. Like it's not really good right now. It's pretty bad, but if we need to take cuts to salary, it's going to start at the top, and we're not going to be letting people go, and we're going to figure this out, and we're going to come through on the other side. I don't know how we'll come through the other side, but we're going to. And I don't want people not feeling like they can sleep at night because they don't know if we're going to let you go next week. We're not. And I don't know how this resolves, but we will get to the other side. But also, we need to be as resourceful as we possibly can because it's not very good right now. So I think it's about knowing yourself. And the second thing I'd say there is this is where team building really matters. What you hope to do with your culture and your team building is to complement yourself. So have some people on your team that will bring the fire, and have some people that will be more stoic when things are rough, because sometimes you need one of the cooler heads to say, hey, we're gonna be fine. Calm down. We're getting a little bit too fired up. And sometimes you need one of the more fiery personalities to be like, we are not taking this seriously enough. This is a real threat. So that's another thing that I've tried to do is find people that complement me and balance. And this is really the key to almost any great leader, is that they're good at building teams of people around them, because even the best leaders have all kinds of huge weaknesses that correspond with the things that make them great leaders. And they're just able to find people that are strong in those areas to put around themselves.
Completely aligned. I completely agree. Well, we always round this podcast out. And again, thank you for being on here. But and speaking of fires, what is a hot take you have right now? And it could be direct to consumer related, or it could be life related. I think we kind of already had some in this episode, but I'm really intrigued to hear what it is. And it could be as fiery as I hate spam, or as really in depth towards the election. I'm all ears.
Well, gosh, I do think, I think as close as I'll get to a political take is I think we have really become a country that is in large part drafting off of the hard work and success of previous generations. And I think we'd better get back to building. I was in China last week. This is probably this will be my hot take. Do not take the rest of the world lightly. And there are many ways when I was in China where I'm like, they're ahead of us there. They're ahead of us there. They're ahead of us there. And they've got plenty of problems also. But this assumption that we are going to continue to be the dominant superpower, it will only be true if we get back to being a country of builders. And unfortunately, I think we had really, in the last several years, have gotten away from that, have disincentivized that in this country. And then I don't even know, this isn't a hot take, but I'll just say, like, the AI stuff is going to be more disruptive than we know. Like, I think that it's interesting because I like it when there's things happening. And the fact that, the knowledge of the human race is growing almost in a year what it would have in 1,000 years, earlier in history is crazy to me. But so, like, we're living in very interesting times. We had the chance of being born when we did, but there's this old Chinese saying, "May you live in interesting times." But it's a Chinese curse, not a blessing. And I think it's an interesting idea that because so many things around us are being disrupted, it's just going to be challenging. And I think we've seen the very beginnings of that. The question that we've got to answer as people and culturally is, what are the parts of the ways that people have done life historically that should never be abandoned? And what are the things that can be different and better because of technology and because of our advancement? And if you fall off either edge, where it's like, oh, all we have to do is go back to 50 years ago, you're going to hate the future. You're going to hate it because it is not going to look like 1950s. I mean, our life today is barely recognizable to somebody who lived in the late 1800s. But, the life of people over the next 10, 20, 30 years, it's just going to be unimaginably different in a lot of ways. But you can fall off the edge on the other side where it's just like, oh, new is better and we're so much more advanced, because I think we've seen that, like whether it's our approach to family or our approach to meaning and purpose, many other things. Like, we basically decided that every human civilization up until now had it wrong. And we're so much smarter, and we're just not. We're just not. That it turns out like people need the same things they've always needed. And so anyway, I think that'll be interesting to see that battle between all of the new technology and learning and what we're capable of, but then a need to hang on to the things that are essential to human thriving, and to see how we work that out as a society.
We agree. And it's funny, I don't know if you know this, I'm half Chinese, and I'm from Hong Kong, and I also go to Guangzhou and Shanghai pretty often.
Just there last week?
Yeah. Well, were you there for not the Canton Fairs right now, is it?
No, we were visiting our primary manufacturer, but then we spent some time in Shanghai just at the end of the trip, which was really fun.
Yeah.
I hadn't been there before.
Well, they're welcoming. They're good. Shanghai it's such a different. I'll speak to it. There's something to go. But yeah, no, it's a lot of what you're speaking to. I very much resonate with. My family. I'm first generation American. Well, they came here. Like I said, my mom's 16, and they are a blatant reminder of what we have here in the United States, and solidifying that strength is so important, and more important than ever. I'm also half Iranian, so what's going on here on that side of the world. So, it's a beautiful thing. I still, to this day, all I will say to what you said is, I still, to this day, when I touch down from any other country, want to kiss the ground that we are on. Very grateful to be an American, and I want to continue that strength in whatever standing it is, and that is being a builder here.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And
it's so easy for people to criticize the United States and to criticize our ancestors or our founders or whatever, but when you look around at the rest of the world, you realize that this is a truly special place. And that I think that's probably the thing, like the absolute decline of patriotism and the trying to run away from, the kind of demonizing of previous Americans is just kind of like insane. if you're a student of the world at all and you realize that just relative to basically every other culture and society, this is a very unique thing here. And like you said, we should not take it for granted. If you were born in America in the last 30 years, you hit a kind of genetic lottery that's difficult to understand. Like, how many people have lived in the history of the world? Let's say it's 15, no, I don't know, 15 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion, whatever it is. You're in the top 0.00000, whatever, 1% by being born in America in the last 40 years because of the amount of opportunity that came with that. And if you take that for granted and you don't appreciate that, then you just have blinders on.
I'm 31 years old. I had a friend who's exactly my age tell me, not to go off on this tangent, but I think it's very important to bring this up. And I know we're right on time, so I apologize. But he told me, I said, you do realize that the leader is obviously like just the face. It's like the CEO. Sometimes they are making decisions, but they are the face, and you need to have authority in that face because we do have enemies. And he said, what enemies? And I really quickly realized now he's 31. So there's the younger generation does not know war, does not understand that side. And when that person told me, he's a very smart person. He's not uneducated. He's not a dumb guy. For him to say what enemies, I realized, wow, we're in for some crazy times. So I just want to say thank you for being here. I mean, I know that people are going to get so much out of this. I know I did, and I'm very grateful to have you on for now and just to be able to speak with you. And for those of you who loved what Mike said, how can people reach out to you? I'm going to have in the show notes regardless, but what's the best way to reach out to you and to learn more about what you do or get in contact with you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. That's where I post whenever I'm active. And then the Operators Podcast is probably the other place that you can catch me regularly.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this. It honestly is an honor. And I'm really grateful we got to have this time and got to speak about things that I believe matter. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, guys, until the next episode, don't forget to subscribe. We are here for you. Bye.